Hello, Tyrone. Thanks for coming on the show today. Tell us about who you are and a little bit about the work that you do.
Absolutely. First and foremost, thanks for having me, John. My name's Tyrone Quarterman. I am the Director of Inclusion and Diversity for Day and Zimmermann. And just kind of a brief background on who I am and my journey. I'm in the Philly area, so I'm in the Northeast. Go Birds. Let's get that out the way, right? Right, first and foremost. No, but I'm in Philly. I was born and raised in Florida. Moved up here. I've been out here for quite some time now. And, my academic journey, studied science as an undergrad, a master's is in public health, and that kind of led me to really diving deep into addressing disparities. So I started out in the healthcare space. I'm in kind of the engineering construction space now, but my professional background has always been and is currently in addressing disparities in a variety of different settings.
Hey, thank you for sharing that. If you don't mind, like staying on that topic of disparities, in the recent years, what has changed in regards to expectations in the workplace to address these disparities?
It's a loaded question, right? I think a lot has changed for better and for worse, right? And that's natural with any change. I'll start with what I think has changed that, maybe we're going in the wrong direction. Obviously, there's a lot going on in the political space right now, at the
Yeah.
federal level, but also at the state and local level, depending on where you live at, right? I'm sure we'll get into that more naturally throughout this discussion, but I think just in general, the political environment, particularly over the last 5 years, right? When you think about COVID, and you think about the resurgence of some civil rights incidents, all of those have played a dramatic role into what disparities exist, but also how people think about addressing them. That being said, there's also been some positive changes. I think, naturally speaking, technology continues to evolve, right? We're in the golden age of AI, as I like to call it, and that's naturally allowed us to address some disparities that led to others. But, I think just natural human evolution, I think more awareness and insight into how different groups deal with disparities, right? You can talk about that from a racial perspective, a cultural perspective, a gender and sexual identity perspective, and so on and so forth. So, there's a lot of good, so there's a lot of bad, and that ultimately just led to the environment we're in now.
Yeah, there is a lot of things in play that really go against possibly creating an environment where everyone has a fair shot at
Mhm,
climbing the ranks, having that
mhm.
opportunity. What does it look like today in the workplace to have fairness and opportunity, access to growth, and ability to climb that ladder?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great question. And when take the concept of fairness, right? Most people think of it as equality. And for those who are, listening or will listen, there's a nice little graphic that I like to use. I don't know who the original author is. I've seen so many different
I think I
iterations of
know
it.
which one you're going
You
to
know what
talk
I'm
about.
talking about? It's like a fence, right?
Yep.
And somebody's kind of looking over that fence. It's a couple people. And we talk about fairness. Most people think of it in terms of equality, right? Which I think is a good benchmark. I think it's a good starting point.
Right.
If nothing else, you want equality, right? I think that's what people strive for. But
Inequality, just to say, is like the same thing for everybody.
correct, that's to say, if we want to do something or we want to go somewhere, everybody has the same opportunity to get there.
Okay.
And that's, that's okay. That's good, right? But equality often doesn't take into account factors that may or may not be in your control, right? That affect you. So let's go with the example of, getting a job, just in general, right? Any given job. You can pick whatever job title you want. Let's say it's a software engineer. Equality would be, look, we're going to post this job. We're going to say we have this job. Whoever wants to apply can apply. Obviously, assuming you meet the criteria, you'll
Yep.
get interviewed and maybe you get the job. But in the greater context of fairness, right? Often what we need to look for are things like equity and justice. So what does that mean in this context? Well, you would think, hey, if we need a software engineer, let's post the job. The most qualified candidates will apply, we'll get them, and that's good enough. But often we don't think about it in the context of, well, what if some people don't have access to the place we're posting the job, right? You see this a lot, particularly in early stage programs. Let's say you're talking about internships, where maybe you're focusing on schools that, historically have some really large numbers, really qualified candidates, but those might be schools that don't take into account the millions of other students out there who are just as, if not more qualified, right? That's not taken into account. Let's say you're holding a career fair for this job. What time are you holding it? Because if you're holding it, obviously any time is going to present conflicts, but if you're only doing, 12 to 1 or 1 to 2, most students might be in class, or they might, you have athletes, right? Or some people work jobs in addition to going to school. So there's all these components, and you can look at this from any example, any perspective, but that's just an insight into what fairness looks like. Now let's take it into the context of at the workplace, right? So now that we understand the concepts of equality versus equity and justice, in the workplace, I think the most striking example are, career advancement opportunities. Often we look at, different demographics of people. Let's say let's stick with our engineers. Often we look at people who say, look, I want to climb the career ladder. I want to become a manager and then eventually a director and so on and so forth. Fairness has to keep in mind that there's multiple things that make up this person, right? What are their strengths, their weaknesses? What are their proclivities? What are their, what's their neurodiversity, right? Do they need certain accommodations? Because these are all, you wouldn't hire them if you didn't think they were very talented, right, and qualified. But that doesn't make them unique. That doesn't, discount the fact that they're unique. They might need certain accommodations to achieve their best. So it's a lot more that we can go into, and I'm sure we will, but I want to
Yeah,
start by just setting the basis of it's not just equality, it's equity and justice.
I love that. And I don't know that we went fully into that graphic because we both are familiar with it.
Hmm.
But I believe the essence of the graphic is everyone's looking over the fence to watch maybe a baseball game.
Hmm.
If
Hmm.
someone's really short and the tall person can see over the fence, no problem. But
Hmm.
is that fair? Like, right? So there's just a box or two under the person so that everybody can actually just see over the fence.
Hmm.
Another example of equity that kind of stuck with me was like, all right, you have a task to do. There's two people, and you have this machine that you don't know how to use.
Hmm.
And each person is handed the instruction manual, and they're told, "Go ahead." And the first person
Hmm.
to get this to work wins. The instruction manual is in French. This person
Hmm.
speaks French, and this person doesn't.
Hmm.
It's not fair. I mean, but
It,
it's equal.
and
So
I'm glad you bring that up and kind of flesh out those examples, because what we've seen and research supports this, right? You can look at quantitative or qualitative research. My background, I started out in research, so I always loved the numbers aspect of things. But for the most part, humans fundamentally understand that, right? And particularly if you put them in a situation where things are unequal, right? So you talk about the instruction manual example. Obviously you and I are both English speaking. I don't unfortunately speak any other languages, but I can
yeah.
get by, I can get out of an emergency situation, maybe with a couple, and instantly you give someone an instruction manual, they'll say, I can't read this, right? I don't speak French. So it's not that people don't fundamentally understand the concept. I think it's people tend not to, embrace it when it's not directly related to their situation. And again, we're all human. It's a natural thing, but unfortunately, when the stakes are high and we talk about, fairness and equality in the workplace and some of those concepts, we can't wait for the empathy, as I like to say. We have to think ahead, and we have to encourage all of us to be allies, even for those who, may not necessarily uh, uh, say it outright. Hey, we might need these accommodations, or it's important for us to think ahead and think for those who, want or need that allyship.
You bringing up allyship. Could you tell me uh, what's a good example? Like, how do you be a good ally, especially to folks that you maybe do not know exactly what it is that they need to get that equal footing in the workplace?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, communication, right?
Uh,
It's very, very tricky to assume, what one person needs, what a group needs. Communicate, right? It's okay to have a thought process of, and I'm just going to pick one dimension of diversity where, let's say it's gender and sexual diversity and inclusion, right? Maybe you're in a meeting with, 10 people in the meeting. There's only maybe 2 to 3 women in the meeting, right? And maybe you're a man, you're someone who's male, and you're listening, you're kind of in the meeting, and you're noticing that, there's only 2 or 3 women there, and they're rarely getting a chance to speak up, contribute,
Mm,
provide feedback. And you might instantly want to jump in and say, hey, like, let's let Sarah and Lucy, chime in. You might want to set that stage immediately. But it starts with the communication, right? Maybe you pull them to the side after and say, hey, I noticed during this meeting, it didn't seem like you were able to contribute as much as others in the meeting, right? Maybe they don't mind, maybe they don't care, and then that's fine. You let it go, no harm, no foul. But if they do notice and they say, you know what, yeah, I'm glad you pointed that out. Based on, kind of the dynamics, maybe my manager's in the meeting, I didn't necessarily want to speak up, but you may be in a position to. So it starts with that communication. And then from there, let the marginalized group or groups, speak to what the deficiency is, right? Maybe it's speaking up in a meeting. Maybe it's I'm being passed up for promotions. Maybe it's any number of things. And then collaborate on, what steps make the most sense to address that problem. Maybe it's a behind closed doors meeting. Maybe it's something more in public forum, but don't take too much into your own hands, if that makes sense.
I, I think that's great. And what I'm hearing is that check in with the person that you're trying to be an ally with. Don't just
Mhm.
assume that because Lucy and I forget the other name didn't get to speak up, that is like you should stop everything and say put the spotlight on them to speak up. That you want to check in to make sure that the way you're being an ally is the way that this person wants the allyship.
Yes. And
Yeah.
and for what it's worth, I'm sorry to cut you. I just wanted to say, when we talk about allyship, the other aspect is don't center the conversation around yourself as an ally, right? And this, I'm not so sure this is something that's readily apparent to people because it can happen so just kind of without a thought, right? Kind of subconsciously.
Oh yeah.
But don't center the conversation around yourself, right? You're in essence a visitor to this space where people are going through things that, could be nominal, but it could be major. It could be something that's really affecting them. You're
Mhm.
there as support, right? And I think that's important to keep in mind, which again, I'm sure we'll break it down more.
That is such an important observation because you carry that one step further, and I've seen good intentions collapse in to just create the absolute opposite, where say, and I saw this around uh, in the aftermath of George Floyd's murder.
Hmm.
And so we saw this a lot of motivation, people wanting to do the right thing, but then there was this like kind of moment where some people would center themselves, and it really lost impact. And if then they were challenged on that, that's when I saw it collapse. Right? Is that you're not seeing my allyship the way that I want it to be seen, and then I don't know how to handle that, and it becomes so more divisive as opposed to a gentle correction, or if they'd done what you had suggested initially, like check in and say, is this how
Yeah.
you want to be? Have me be an ally for you if I can. We could do that. Uh, when you're thinking of the future, you mentioned a lot of things are disrupting and changing technology. Like, what's something that future thinking companies can do to like future proof themselves and make sure that they're attracting the right talent. When that talent gets there, they're engaged and they stay. Like, what can be done?
So there's actually two things, and I'll leave to you which one you want me to explore first. One is I think is the easy one, AI, right? My
Okay.
answer is not going to be the traditional response, but I think AI is one, and I think the other is just kind of the way I would describe it is being more open. So which pathway would you like me to take? Because I can go with either of them.
Ooh. let's I'm very intrigued by the AI, but let's start with
Okay,
be more open. Is that like
okay.
curiosity kind of sense about others' experiences or
It's
open to
it's not something I can. neatly, and that's why I had trouble even, coming out with it. Um, I'll just go into it, right? Obviously, as we talk about future and what's coming up, naturally you have to think about, well, younger generations, right? Younger people, what are trends that make sense to the next generation of the workforce, right? That's not to discount, any age range that's in the workforce, but again, they often shape trends for what is happening as, the workforce continues to develop. And again, numbers guy, research is showing that younger generations that are coming into the workforce and are beginning to enter that traditional age where, you kind of run into a manager or director level role, some sort of management style role. And what we're noticing is that in previous generations, the workplace dynamic was very just, we have a job, we do it, we go home. We don't tend to ask for any more context around why we're being told to do things unless it's absolutely necessary, right? If I'm your manager, John, and you come into work and I say, I need you to do this, and then that's all we got planned for today. Traditionally, you go in, you do it, you go home, that's it, right? What we're finding is now, particularly the younger generations, but we're finding that people want more context, right? They want to know the why more. And I think that's a great thing. Quite honestly, I think, you can go back and forth about if it's implemented in the right way, but we need to be more open as employers, as companies, and be more transparent about what's our motivation, right? If it's we're doing this because it increases profitability, fine, right? But don't make it an assumption. If we're doing this because there's legal recourse if we don't, that's also fine. That's understandable, but don't make the assumption. What we're finding is that, particularly these younger generations, as the future of work comes and goes, is that people want context. And so
Mhm.
it's important. And you can look at that from an employee engagement standpoint, right? People are more engaged when they understand the mission and its purpose. You can look
Yeah.
at that from just kind of a development standpoint. People, as they're climbing through their own personal career ladder, they want to know, well, what do I need to do to make it there, and what examples do you have, right? Don't just tell me to do something, tell me how I can do it best or what I need to avoid. And you can go on and on and on, but the point is context, openness, right? Transparency. These are things that are going to be really important, especially as we shift to a more automated, kind of world where some things are going to be automated and humans aren't necessarily going to handle those responsibilities anymore.
That's a really good perspective. And I don't know if you intended to do it, but I can't now not ask the AI since you just ended there with the automation piece.
I
So
didn't mean to. It just came
that,
up.
okay, well then let's go there. So it's openness and asking and trying to just understand and be transparent because that knowledge increases buy-in and connects you to a purpose of the company and you have clarity. But as we see AI come into the workplace, more things are automated. I'd
Mhm.
say it's arguably more important to be good at being human than ever.
Mhm.
How do you think that's going to impact the workplace and what can we do about it?
I think you hit the nail right on the head. It's more important to be human than ever, right? What we don't want to do, and I'm just saying this from a general, professional speaking to professionals who are listening, professionals, you can't. It's like sports. I'm a sports guy, right? I don't know if I said this enough, but I love sports. I played sports, and the one thing that almost any sport will teach you, basketball, baseball, you name it, you as an athlete have something that makes you attractive to a team, to a coach, right? If you're a baseball player, maybe you're the greatest power hitter they've ever seen. If you're a basketball player, you shoot threes, that's your way to get on the court, so on and so forth. As a professional, you have a skill set that makes you attractive to employers. What AI is here to do, in theory, is to augment that skill set, but inevitably, some skill sets will be replaced, right? I know it's a word people don't want to hear, but keeping that in mind, right, there's some things that AI can't replace. And there's some things that AI is simply to augment, to overlap with, right? So as professionals, we need to, like you say, continue to be humans, be a good human, be good at what we're good at doing. So, I think there's a bit of a tie into that concept of transparency and openness, right? it's hard. It's not impossible, right? There's learning models out there where, AI can mimic kind of human emotions and things like that, but that's what we're good at as humans, right? We're complex. We have so many different ways to reason and analyze and empathize and all these different things that either you can't or you don't want to rely on AI for. And so we need to lean into that and look at AI as a tool. It's not competition, right? It's okay to utilize it in the right places, utilize it ethically, but embrace your human side, embrace your human nature, and realize what makes you unique as an accountant or as a lawyer or as a doctor or as an HR professional. I mean, the list goes on and on. If you lean into that, then that's where we have the symbiosis and the partnership with the technology that we're developing instead of fighting it.
Yeah, augmenting your job with AI sounds way better than just getting out of the way so AI can take over. And you
Mhm.
mentioned emotions and feelings around, being human.
Mhm.
Um, is creativity and innovation something that's uniquely human, or do you think AI uh, innovates and creates in the same way?
I, that's a tricky question. I want to say both, but just for the purpose of discussion, I won't ride the middle line. I'll say I think it's a human thing. I
Mhm.
think that AI can be creative, right? It's one thing to have creative elements, it's another thing to be a creative person or machine. I think what makes us special in this realm is that, just like we talked about, right? We have these unique emotions and feelings and ability to empathize, and that's important because often in I don't read as much as I should, but I try to read as much as I can. Um, Oftentimes what I learn when I'm just reading, researching, is that when you have a chance to sit still, right, and your brain's not as flooded with outside thoughts or tasks, maybe it's family life or professional, whatever your responsibilities are, when you have that chance to sit there and think about not only what you've experienced, but how those around you experienced a given moment or a given instance, that's what allows those creative thoughts and ideas to flow, right? Maybe you went to a work mixer, right? And maybe it was a networking event and you met with, your manager was there, but also some people from a department that you have not met in person yet. We're unique in that we can go into those environments and not only be present for ourselves, right? Tyrone is here at this mixer and he's, with the HR team, but I can also notice, oh, the finance group is over there. Maybe I'll go and talk to them. And, in just a 5 minute conversation, I can get a sense of how they feel about this mixer, right? What's better, what could be done better, what could be done worse. So then when I go home and I kind of, decompress for the day, I think, man, Mary from IT or Jack from finance said, well, we need to be doing this in order to, and so that's where it comes from, right? So I think it's that unique combination of our skill set as humans that allow us to be creative and innovative, in our time. And we instruct the AI based on that.
I think that's great. I think I'm on the fence too about whether it's creative or whether it's just appearing to be creative and it's stuff we don't
Mm.
know yet that already exists that it's somehow mimicking. And as human beings, boy, you said it. We've got layers and all kind of feelings, emotions, and experiences, past and thinking about the future that creates this mix of things to have that new best idea pop up in a way that's completely unexpected, or maybe it's a conversation between two people. None of that happens if people are upset about losing their
Yeah.
job to AI or thinking that you're somehow a threat because we're having this conversation.
And if I may, just to that
Yeah.
point, I've been trying my best to be industry neutral, right? Because who knows who's going to hear this, right? I don't want to give one industry or another, but I have to call out arts on this, right?
Okay.
Be it music, movies, you name it. I think they are still, even in the midst of the technological revolution we're in, I think they do a really good job. You go see your favorite movie, you listen to your favorite song, human emotion is captured in there. And I think it's important that we need to learn across industries, right? Just as a professional, it's important to learn from other industries. But I think the arts really has it down. And even in the midst of all this revolution, it still manages to capture, human emotion, right? Empathy and all these sorts of things. And so I think we can learn a lot from there. And I think the more we engage with things like that, it'll help us in our day-to-day work, right? When it comes to things like inclusion and developing the future. So
From a self-proclaimed sports guy pulling in a strong arts reference, I love it. Wasn't expecting
support the arts.
it. And I
I wasn't
agree, man.
artistic, so
Yeah, there's one that you can hear a song, man, and it could take you to a place
yeah,
that's full of a ton of emotions. You could see a show, a movie that does the same thing, and experiencing those emotions is uniquely human. Um, Tyrone, thank you so much for sharing your ideas, your expertise with us today. It's been great discussing these topics with you today.
absolutely. I appreciate the time. And to those listening, I hope you enjoyed this conversation as well.